Okay, next up, we're going to have a panel discussion for you entitled Midwest, the Heartland of the Global Bioeconomy. And this panel will be hosted by Ben Rhodes, who is Executive Director of the Nebraska Ethanol Board. So, Ben, over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending this panel, which, as Leo said, is the Midwest, the heartland of the global bioeconomy, which is a pretty snazzy title for which I cannot take any credit. But we do have 4 distinguished panelists up here on stage with me for this discussion, and I'm glad they're already up here. I'll introduce them one by one. To my immediate left, we have Jan tenBensel, who is the Nebraska Corn Farmer and the chairman of the Nebraska Ethanol Board. He's also on the board of directors for the Nebraska Corn Growers and the National Corn Growers Associations. Next to him is Angela Consani, the CEO of the Bioscience Core Skills Institute, the BCSI. Next to her is Billy Hagstrom, who's the CEO and co-founder of Bluestem Biosciences, headquartered right here in Omaha, just down the block. And on the far end, last but not least, is Tim McAravey, who's the Vice President of Customer Service and Public Affairs at the Omaha Public Power District. I'm going to move over to sit next to them, and we'll get started. Is this on? It's on. Excellent. So we're going to go and dive right in, and this first question is for all 4 of you, but Jan, I'm going to put you on the spot and make you start, because I'm really curious, as we talk about the Midwest and being here in Omaha, I'm curious what makes Nebraska and the Midwest so uniquely situated to be a leader in the bioeconomy space.
Well, thank you, Ben. Well, of course, the Midwest in general has a strong bio presence now with the ethanol industry, et cetera. But since I'm here for Nebraska Corn, I'll specifically talk about Nebraska. One of the big advantages we have in Nebraska is our irrigation. Irrigated corn in Nebraska is about half of the carbon intensity score of the Midwest average. And you ask, well, how is that possible? Well, by having a steady, consistent crop and consistent production, we're able to efficiently use inputs, nitrogen, et cetera, as we go forward on that. And that really gives Nebraska a huge advantage. Now, a couple other reasons for Nebraska corn, specifically corn. We have less rainfall in Nebraska than most of the other corn-growing states in the United States. That helps with our nitrogen mobility. We don't have as much leaching of nitrogen. We don't lose as much nitrogen into the groundwater, et cetera. That helps tremendously also. And also because of the lack of rainfall, especially as you get west, we are predominantly no-till. So we don't have much tillage. A lot of the things that climate-smart ag wants farmers to do, Nebraska farmers are doing already.
Angela?
Yeah, by the way, thanks for having me. I'm going to come at this from a much different perspective in that my focus is almost always on education and workforce, and I think you have some really keen advantages that we aren't talking about enough at this conference. At BCSI, we do a lot of work with Southeast Community College, with Metro, with University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and then here in Omaha. And what we've seen across this region in particular is a really intense investment in education assets with the sole purpose of being workforce development, which is exceptional. It's exceptional to the nation. Now, my organization's national. It's not exceptional, however, to the Midwest, which it shouldn't surprise probably most of you. The Midwest focuses on workforce, and we realize that education is often, almost always, the goal of anyone getting an education is to get a job. But here in Nebraska, what I see is a clustering around this particular sector taking place in your education assets, and I think that that's going to pay off over the long haul, because capital doesn't come to regions that do not have predictable incentives. And if you have a strong and resilient supply chain in your workforce, that will attract your capital.
Excellent points so far from both Jan and Angela. Billy, I want to turn to you on this because you headquartered your company in Omaha, and you could have chosen anywhere, so I'm curious what made you Omaha, Nebraska, so attractive to a biosciences producer?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ben. Yeah, when we started the company about 3.5 years ago, and the competition predominantly in our space was on the coast, and we said we're going to headquarter Bluestem in Omaha, Nebraska. I mean, people thought we were aliens. They did not understand, A, how we could raise the capital, bring in the appropriate talent, and then have the requisite plan to scale up our business. And I always kind of loved being a contrarian thinker when everyone's zigging, how can you zag and differentiate yourselves? Here we are 3.5 years later, and as I'm kind of taking the receipts of, well, what was the decision we made and how is it culminating and coming together, I really feel like the greatest superpower that we have about being in Nebraska has come down to the leadership of the state. There are so many unfair advantages that Nebraska has that's going to allow it to be a leader in the bioeconomy. We have incredible water, agricultural resources, Class 1 railroad, people, and you put all these pieces together, what's the missing ingredient? Well, the missing ingredient is how can we create a cohesive plan to accelerate and animate the bioeconomy, which is a focus of this topic and conference here today, and really putting it all together. When we asked for our first institutional check to raise our round, just the infrastructure of having an organization like Invest Nebraska to give us the time of day with 8 slides as we didn't even know what we were doing, to then give us the support through Nebraska DED and other parts of the program, that then opened up the doors to the National Corn, or the Nebraska Corn Growers and the Nebraska Ethanol Board and those other elements where we could start to build a plan that was really aligned with the stakeholders for the state. And I would just be remiss to say, and I can't imagine anyone who's done more for a bioeconomy at a state level than Governor Pillen, and we're just lucky to have those supporters and the wind to our back as we build, because it's really, really hard.
Excellent points. Tim, anything to add from the power perspective?
Ben, the only thing I'd add from an energy perspective, I believe is a well-kept secret, if you will, of Nebraska being the last fully public power state, and I do think that is an advantage. You have public power providers seeking to provide the power for this industry and doing so without a primary focus on shareholder return, but rather a primary focus on providing reliable, affordable, and environmentally sensitive energy for these projects. And you have local control. So in many cases, your peers in your city, in your county, or at a regional level are controlling the company, and that can be a really good focus for initiatives like this.
Excellent, and thank you to all four of you for excellent perspectives on that question. But this wouldn't be a very productive conversation if we only sang Kumbaya for 30 minutes. So now I'm going to ask you the tough questions. And Billy, I'm going to start with you. Where do you see as the current pinch points between the different sectors of the value chain in the bioeconomy? And we've got 4 very different perspectives up here on stage. And as you mentioned, there are several more stakeholders involved. What could we still improve on here in Nebraska and more broadly the Midwest?
Yeah, I'd say probably the biggest constraint to accelerating the bioeconomy continues to be the capital markets. There's a lot of unproven technologies, low TRL technologies or technology readiness level, and you don't really have the early stage or medium stage capital market support to accelerate those technologies. And so we don't sing Kumbaya. I'll try and be a little bit controversial or constructive and kind of ascertain as to why. We have a market signal right now, which is that agricultural prices or our feedstocks for biology are saying it's time to build. This is the time to use agricultural inputs because prices are medium or lower quartile from historically where they've been. But why is the market not getting that signal? And I think we created a distortion over the last 4 years where there was this presumption that there was $1 trillion of free money coming out of the federal government, and it put a lot of pause and restraint on the private capital markets to say, we're not going to invest until you can prove or validate that you've gotten money from Washington first. And those are very different timelines. And so here we are in a new administration. We're incredibly excited that trade plus investment is now the du jour. Like, this is the new way we're thinking about cross-border partnerships. And I think that has the potential to unlock what's probably been the biggest constraint over the last 24 months.
Excellent point. Angela, you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, so this is a tougher question, right? Needless to say, nobody wants somebody from outside of the region to come in and be critical. So it's always difficult to answer these questions when I'm asked on a panel, but I will tell you, what I'm seeing nationwide is that the regions that are going to emerge the winners are those that cooperate with each other. So recommendations for improvement, consider getting on board right now with AI. I can tell you what's going on the coast, and it's fascinating and a little terrifying. Things that I'm seeing that are innovating around that, creating digital twin test beds that are vendor neutral, where the data is shared, if you can imagine the power of that. Determining what are your training and your manufacturing capacity nodes across the state, and then signing capacity sharing agreements across your region with each other. And I know this sounds really disruptive and threatening when you're trying to build a business or build a profit, the idea of sharing assets. But I can tell you that doing so will make your education and workforce development pipeline more resilient. You'll be able to move people around at will if you're capable of sharing them with each other. You'll be able to borrow each other's equipment, which seems like a little thing, but actually turns out to be an enormous thing when you're dealing with equipment that has highly specialized uses. And then sharing those data sets will allow you to accelerate your entire region.
Jan, from the farm level, where do you see our current pinch points at?
Well, there's always a pinch point. Now, I was just going to go off something Billy had said with the market, screaming for more uses. 20 years ago when the ethanol boom started, we have developed every kernel of corn used for ethanol today didn't exist 20 years ago. So the natural yield curve of the farmers in the United States, in the Midwest especially, has increased production and still using less fertilizer than we did in 1980. So these are big things. Now, the pinch points, you look at federal legislation, 45Z, we start talking about sustainable aviation fuel. We've reduced the incentive to do that significantly. Now, Nebraska is in a great situation right now with the CCS pipelines. With the Trailblazer pipeline, within days or weeks, we're going to be able to knock 30 points off of CI scores for feedstock in Nebraska. Some of our friends and neighbors in other states are working on projects, and hopefully that they'll get through because there's room enough in here for everybody. We need to make sure that we can sequester enough carbon to make our end users happy and make sure everybody gets the product that they want. We just need to be able to work together, very importantly, as the Midwest, and move these projects forward.
Anything to add, Tim, from the power perspective?
I would love to say that there's no reason for an energy provider to be a part of this question. And it used to be that was the case, right? The energy sector was out of sight, out of mind. As you get to these projects and are nearing or preparing execution, my encouragement is think of energy earlier than you think you should and get engaged directly with your energy providers, whoever will be providing energy. This industry is going through disruptive transformation for a lot of different reasons, supply chain disruptions, regulatory challenges, but probably the single biggest is demand-driven load growth. And it is putting a real strain on utilities virtually across the country. And as you look at some of these, to the extent that projects could be located in more rural areas, that adds complexity of delivering energy and capacity to those locations. So think of it early, think more specifically and discreetly than you think you might.
Excellent points. And what I'm hearing is sort of a common refrain among all four of you is that these are all challenges, but we can turn them all into opportunities, and we can do better on them. So there is room for hope. And I think that's where I'll pivot to now, and this is sort of the crux of this whole panel. Angela, I'll start with you to put you on the spot, because you are not a Nebraskan and you have the sort of the nationwide perspective. How can all the key stakeholders in Nebraska and the Midwest collaborate more effectively, to continue to lead the bioeconomy from right here in the heartland?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned a few of them. The idea of sharing data with each other, which is crazy, but also the result of that being extraordinarily powerful in those areas that I see it. Then something that we see everywhere I go, and I'm going to give you one cautionary tale. I recently worked with a team on one of the coasts on a large grant application coming from their state, going to the federal government, and it was declined, and the feedback said, we received a very similar application from another organization from your same state. So don't compete with each other at that level. Collaborate with each other and cooperate when you pursue, particularly public funding. You just saw Biomade up here. I will tell you that those states that are succeeding madly with the MIIs have state funding for that match, which is always the most. MIA money is expensive money, folks, but it's expensive because you have to have a dollar for dollar match on that money. Those states that have set aside funds to match MII money are reaping the benefits of that. It allows them to de-risk some technological experimentation that you cannot do in the private sector on your own. So I would encourage that at the state level as well. But the number one would be don't compete with yourselves when you go to market looking to secure federal funding for any of these larger projects.
Billy, where do you see further opportunities for collaboration here in Nebraska and elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can just share a story just for how we started to think about collaboration when we started Bluestem. We were about 5 or 6 months into the journey when we raised our first pre-seed capital raise in August of 2022. And really, if you look at the first 8 slides of when we started the company, we're in service of agricultural communities and new sources of demand, and we're in service of existing biorefinery infrastructure that we can create in an additive and in an and way to create new farmer demand. And our thought was to reach the point of commercialization is going to be years of hard work. And to your points, how can we start to communicate early with our stakeholders so they understand our story? I've always said from the beginning, for us to be successful to commercially license in a small community in Nebraska, we're going to have a social contract with that community and all of the various stakeholders. And you don't just do that by telling them that you're going to cut a ribbon 7 years from now. You build those relationships and dialogues early. And just a couple months into that time when we raised our first $5 million, we met with the Nebraska Ethanol Board and got to present to the board of directors when admittedly, we really didn't even know what we were doing, but we shared the vision of where we wanted to be in 3, 5, and 7 years. And I think those conversations are so instructive. Build those relationships now, because when you're a little early stage startup like us, you need all the support you can get.
Absolutely, and we were happy to be one of the first partners you had in this state, and it's been a wonderful relationship ever since. Tim, anything on the power side that you can see as opportunities rather than challenges?
I appreciate that, Ben. I would reiterate the early communication as critically important. I would also urge openness to different ideas as you work with your utility as you get closer to project execution in how things might be solved. Lastly, one of the things that we seek to try to educate people on is in this demand-driven boom for energy demand, all electrons are good electrons. A few years ago, we have been able to pick and choose, right? We like these because they are lower emissions, and we dislike those. In order to keep up with the demand in the United States for industries like this and others, and AI and machine learning, we will need an all of the above strategy, and that involves a very different and broader constituent set that we've had before.
Absolutely. Jan, going from all the way back to the beginning of the value chain from the farm level, where do you see future opportunities coming into play?
Well, I think it's very important that we remember we have to get value all the way through the value chain. We have to get value to the farm level and to the intermediate level, to the plant level, just top to bottom. And I think that's very important as we go forward because, farmers aren't going to be interested in dropping their CI score another 5 to 10 points without some incentive to do so. And if that means more, incentives for CSA practices from the USDA or just a premium from the feedstock, the end user, these are things we can do. Nebraska's open for business. We've got everything we need right here. Our neighboring states, this is a great place to be. As compared to, say, the Houston Ship Channel, for instance. We want your facilities here in Nebraska. We want them in Iowa. We want them in our neighboring states. And, moving forward, the Nebraska-NICE is a great partnership to be in.
Absolutely. And you kind of touched on it, Jen, so I'll go back to you. As we look for legislation and regulation, what are the current hurdles and what are the current legislation you'd like to see enacted to create favorable conditions for the bioeconomy, whether that's state or federal?
Well, we could, we can start dreaming big and look at, a renewable chemical standard, possibly. I mean, we could start looking at some way to encourage the bioethylene and et cetera to make plastics and chemicals from bio sources. And, I mean, essentially we're turning CO2 into products at this point. And we've got these wonderful, massive CO2 air capture fields called cornfields, and they do this wonderful thing with photosynthesis. This is a really good program. If we could work on 45Z, get some more extension onto that, the world has a hunger for low carbon products, and we're here to do that. And with the right incentives, we can really make it work out.
That's right. Billy, I was talking with someone on your staff, and he said you were in D.C. last week. What was your message to our federal officials on that trip?
Well, I'll have to keep a little bit of it confidential, but let me share my philosophy for how we think about DC. It goes back to the early and often, right? Building these relationships and partnerships, because we're in service of also federal initiatives, national security initiatives, farm security initiatives. But the premise when we started the company was we were going to build a business that could be wholly economic without tax credits or any other federal support, that the business would be economic on its own right. And I always said, if you pull up our financial or techno-economic model in that cell where you might want to sensitize for a biochemical policy or other ways that we could participate, the cell value today is zero. And so really, I think the part where we really try and engage the most with at the federal level is medium and long-term thinking. How can we create that next wave of demand that's going to have substantive end market for Jan's constituents? I think about today, 50-ish% of the corn in the state of Nebraska is ground for ethanol. And so as we increase supply and have global competition from South America, China, and other markets, how can Bluestem be a small part, but be also a substantive part where we can create those next levels of technology and demand? So maybe humbly one day I can say we got somewhere close to what ethanol did for our communities. And that's our mission.
It's a great goal, and it's a great long-term goal as well. And I like the point you made about we don't want a tax credit propped up industry. We want a free market industry, and it's great that you're working in that direction. Angela, anything on the workforce side that you're looking for from our state and federal partners?
Well, I already mentioned one of them, which is at the state level, I would love to see both Nebraska, Missouri, Kansas, the Midwest set aside some match funding so that our schools, our universities, the research departments at the universities, as well as our smaller startups could tap into MII funding for new technology, kind of de-risking, tackling some more interesting and innovative ideas. At the federal level, probably I think we all are wishing for the same thing, which is some consistency of policy, predictability. Again, I'll repeat, capital does not come to areas that do not have predictable incentives. So until policy stabilizes and we stop suffering from this kind of policy whiplash, I think that there's always going to be that feeling of uncertainty, and uncertainty is never good for the economy. So probably that stability.
Absolutely. I think the word of the year so far in the ethanol industry has been uncertainty. So we're all looking for that stability. Tim, as a public power entity, I mean, you're already a public body. Is there anything you're looking for, or maybe deregulation or any legislation in particular?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ben. I would say broadly, one of the things that we look for is the ability to serve load to pursue all of the above and to not necessarily have a particular technology favored or disfavored, and which can create an artificial constraint. We have to be able to grow. All utilities have to be able to grow to support the load growth necessary in this country. So that is an important one. I'd say more locally is some help, even at a local level, and to use Billy's term of engaging early and often, around permitting of infrastructure. We get it. Like, no one likes infrastructure, electrical infrastructure near them. I'd encourage someone to raise your hand if you walk out in your back or your front yard and say, that is a dang good looking transformer in the corner of my yard, right? No one does that. We get it. And yet it's necessary, and that's some help that we may need.
Excellent. Anything else to add, Jan?
Like I say, Nebraska and the Midwest are open for business. Let's get some stuff done.
Absolutely. In our last 5 minutes here, I want to look towards the future and talk about that business or even potential business. And Tim, I'm actually going to start with you as a, I'm sure you get approached by companies of all shapes and sizes all the time looking for power. In the next 5 to 10 years, where do you see the bioeconomy going? And without giving anything proprietary away, what kind of companies have approached you looking for power?
Well, we have a long list of companies, and with providing the essential service that we do, we're involved in all of those conversations. So virtually everyone needs electricity. So we're involved to try to provide that on the time that people need and the place that a project needs. And we work through all of those constraints that I talked through earlier. Size of the load matters, and specificity of the load matters. Flexibility of that load matters. So we focus a lot there. And it's not just in the bioag industry. It is being an essential service. We're working with all customers that want to grow across all industries. And what we ask folks, especially extraordinarily large customers, to be open to different conversations. We have to balance the opportunity for significant load increase with the risks associated with sometimes tens of millions of dollars of infrastructure put into places that there's a single use. So we have to be able to have different conversations about how we mutually defray some of those risks and be able to serve on a timeline that's needed.
That's very valuable insight. Billy, I'll turn to you. Give us your prediction for the next 5 to 10 years of the bioeconomy in Nebraska and beyond.
Sure. Well, so we're focused on our customer first and foremost. We spend I always try and tell the team to spend as little time on our competition. And so I'll speak for myself or just try and give a little bit for a roadmap for our ambitions. Our company has always been strategically silent. It's kind of, at least in my feeling, it's the Nebraska way. We should be under-promising and over-delivering and always meeting the expectations to the stakeholders that we've previously communicated. So we spend a lot of time and thoughtfulness for when and how we communicate, because we don't want to be on the wrong side of expectations given the level of support that we've had. I'll put in a plug because Cameron from our team who's our vice president of GR has put together a fabulous new website. Our last one basically said nothing for 3.5 years. So if you want to see a little bit more for the texture and mission and what we're building, it's worth checking out. But my prediction is, and where the team's aligned, and the goal is, Bluestem will be commercialized in less than 5 years. We have to be. We'll be building our demonstration facility and finalizing our basis of design toward the end of the year. That will be a fabulous construction based in the state of Nebraska. I won't say where. We're keeping it confidential. But yeah, those are our 2 milestones. We get through the demonstration phase, we raise the requisite funding for our commercial plant, and we do that in far less than 5 years.
Excellent. It's very exciting to hear. Angela, how about you? Where are you seeing in the next 5 years?
History predicts the future. I think I always base whatever's coming up on what I've seen in the past. And I've spent the last 5 years traveling the country, visiting facilities and meeting with industry and employers all over the country. I think that in the next 5 years, the regions that will win are those that share plants, policy, and people. So I think that you build resilience within your supply chain through cooperation over competition. I think it's an idea that's often not considered, but the time is now to begin considering it. I think with the coming of AI, a lot of people don't realize just how crazy things are going to get with that, with process optimization in particular, coming from machine learning. I'll give you one really cool example of this. I'm working with a university on the East Coast right now that is purchasing the failed projects of a particular biopharma company. And they've asked them, give us everything you failed to accomplish. We want all your old failed data. The reason being, we're now realizing that some of those projects failed because we were too dumb. It wasn't that the project wasn't viable, we just couldn't see the answer. But we now have the tools with AI to find those answers. I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things take place around process optimization because of things like that. So I would say work together and put all of your support behind each other, and that will be the region that ends up winning out.
Absolutely. Jan?
I predict that the region's farmers and corn growers will continue to raise lower carbon feedstocks all the time with a good solid yield curve, and I predict that the ethanol industry of the Midwest and Nebraska will continue to expand and produce lower carbon products, lower carbon fuels, lower carbon feedstocks for various products, either SAF or bioplastics, biochemicals, whatever the case may be.
Many exciting things in the work. I want to thank all of you for sharing your perspectives up here on stage with us. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thanks, everyone.